3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
On July 20th, 1969, history was made when the Lunar Module of NASA's Apollo 11 mission landed on the Moon. Inside it were 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Edwin E. Aldrin and Michael Collins. What followed became one of mankind's most iconic moments. But behind this heroic feat lies a story you've probably never heard before. Why America went to the Moon? We need to go back to the Cold War era, a time when the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a battle, not just on Earth, but in space. It all began in 1957, when the Soviet Union became the first country in the world to launch an artificial satellite into space. Its name was Sputnik, and it shocked the world. In response, just a few months later, in 1958, the United States launched its first satellite, Explorer 1. But the Soviets were still ahead. Then came another blow. On April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, orbiting the Earth. It was a moment of immense pride for the USSR and a wake-up call for the United States. Just 1 week later, on April 20, 1961, President John F. Kennedy wrote an urgent letter to his Vice President, Lyndon B. Johnson, asking, "How can we beat the Soviets in space? Can we put a laboratory in orbit? Fly around the Moon? Or do something dramatic that captures the world's attention?" Soon, they reached a bold conclusion.
Before this decade is out, of landing a man on the Moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Before this decade is out, we will land a man on the Moon and return him safely to the Earth. This wasn't just a speech. It was a promise. After President Kennedy's bold promise, for the next several years, the American government allocated billions of dollars to NASA. To make this dream a reality, NASA began extensive testing on rockets, command modules, heat shields, propulsion systems, and more. From 1963 to 1967, many unmanned tests were carried out to ensure the safety and reliability of the spacecraft. Then came February 12, 1967, NASA planned its first manned test, known as the Apollo 1 mission. But tragedy struck before it could even launch. On January 27, 1967, during a routine ground test, a fire broke out inside the command module. All 3 astronauts, Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee, lost their lives in that fire. It was a devastating moment for NASA. But they didn't give up. They continued with unmanned missions. AS-202 and AS-203, Apollo 4, Apollo 5, Apollo 6. These were crucial in testing components of the launch system. Then came a major milestone. October 1968, Apollo 7 was launched.
1B flight vehicle, designated AS-205, was launched on October 11th from Launch Complex 34 of the Kennedy Space Center, placing the first manned Apollo spacecraft, Apollo 7, into Earth orbit.
Once again, humans were sent into space, and this time it was a success. Just 2 months later, in December 1968, Apollo 8 was launched. This mission sent 3 astronauts near the Moon, orbiting it, but not landing. 3 months later, in March 1969, came Apollo 9, the mission that tested the Lunar Module. This was the part of the spacecraft that was actually going to land on the Moon. 2 months after that, in May 1969, Apollo 10 was launched. This mission was a full dress rehearsal. 3 astronauts went through everything planned for Apollo 11, except actually landing. And finally, on July 16, 1969, the historic moment arrived. The Apollo 11 mission was launched, the mission that would change human history forever. 3 astronauts were on board. Neil Armstrong, commander. Buzz Aldrin, Lunar Module pilot. Michael Collins, command module pilot, the man who never walked on the Moon. The stage was now set. The Moon was waiting. July 19, 1969, after traveling approximately 400,000 kilometers from Earth, the Apollo 11 spacecraft entered lunar orbit. At this point, the spacecraft was separated into 2 parts. The Command and Service Module, CSM, named Columbia, piloted by Michael Collins. The Lunar Module, named Eagle, with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on board. The plan was simple yet risky. Collins would stay in the CSM orbiting the moon, while Armstrong and Aldrin would land on the moon using the Lunar Module. On July 20, 1969, around 8:17 p.m., the Lunar Module began its descent toward the moon's surface. But suddenly, during the descent, alarms went off inside the module, code 1201 and 1202 errors. Neither Armstrong nor Aldrin knew what they meant, so they immediately contacted Mission Control in Houston. Mission Control analyzed the situation and confirmed.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle Houston, you're go for landing, over.
You're go for landing. The cause? The guidance computer was overloaded with tasks, but it was programmed to prioritize critical functions, so the landing process continued smoothly. The landing was initially set to happen automatically using the onboard computer, but when Armstrong saw that the designated landing site was full of large boulders, he took manual control of the Lunar Module. At just 1 above the surface, Armstrong began looking for a safe spot to land. Fuel levels were dropping fast. At 7:56 p.m., Buzz Aldrin reported that only 5% fuel remained. Mission Control started a 60-second countdown, which was followed by a 30-second call, beyond which they would have had to abort the mission. But with only about 20 seconds of fuel left, Armstrong found a flat area and safely landed the module. His radio message,
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
The world cheered. The impossible was done. A few hours later, Armstrong suited up, opened the hatch. Armstrong struggled to open the Lunar Module's hatch, not because it was stuck, but due to the high pressure difference inside the cabin. After some effort, he forced it open and began descending the ladder in a bulky 80-kilogram spacesuit. And slowly descended the ladder. At 10:56 p.m. on July 20, 1969, he placed his left foot on the moon's surface and said,
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Buzz Aldrin followed shortly after. Together, they spent about 2 hours and 15 minutes walking on the moon. They conducted scientific experiments, collected 23 kilograms of lunar rock and soil samples, set up a passive seismometer to detect moonquakes, deployed a laser retroreflector to measure the exact Earth-Moon distance, measured solar winds with a foil experiment, installed a television camera to broadcast signals back to Earth. They also planted the American flag and left behind a plaque that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." But one thing they didn't know at that moment. When Armstrong exited the module earlier, he accidentally broke off a critical switch, the ascent engine arming switch, the switch needed to launch the Lunar Module back into orbit. Had they not found a fix, they would have been stranded on the moon forever. Buzz Aldrin quickly realized that the switch was nothing more than a trigger to complete an electrical circuit. So he reached for something simple, a ballpoint pen. With remarkable calm, he inserted the pen into the broken panel and completed the circuit manually. It worked. A simple ballpoint pen to complete the electrical circuit and activate the switch. It was this small act that allowed the Eagle to take off from the moon and reconnect with Michael Collins aboard Columbia. From there, the 3 astronauts set course to return to Earth. The landing was done. But the journey home had just begun. The 3 astronauts were reunited, and the spacecraft began its journey home. But the dangers weren't over. To re-enter Earth's atmosphere, the spacecraft had to detach the service module, which was designed to burn up upon re-entry. NASA had installed thrusters on the service module to push it safely away from the command module and avoid a collision during separation. But there was a critical failure: the thrusters didn't work. As the service module broke apart, debris floated dangerously close to the command module. The astronauts could do nothing but watch and hope they wouldn't be hit. Miraculously, the debris missed. The command module held steady. As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the heat shield held up. Parachutes deployed successfully, and the module splashed down in the Pacific Ocean. The astronauts were rescued and brought aboard a recovery ship, alive and safe. The risk of failure was so high that U.S. President Richard Nixon had prepared an alternate speech, in case the mission failed and the astronauts were stranded on the moon. Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men. Thankfully, he never had to deliver it. Despite the overwhelming evidence, many people still believe that the Apollo 11 moon landing was a hoax. Over the years, countless conspiracy theories have emerged, claiming that the United States faked the moon landing to win the space race against the Soviet Union, especially since the event happened in 1969, just 1 year before the end of the decade, fulfilling President Kennedy's promise. Let's break down some of the most popular theories, and the truth behind them. Why was the flag fluttering? One of the most cited claims is that the American flag appeared to flutter in videos, something that shouldn't be possible on the moon, since there's no atmosphere or wind. The truth? NASA had designed a special flag for the moon. It had a horizontal rod along the top edge to keep the flag extended and visible, since a regular flag would hang limp in the absence of air. But during setup, astronauts had trouble fully extending the rod, causing wrinkles and ripples that looked like the flag was moving. In some video clips, the flag appears to flutter, but only when the astronauts are touching or adjusting it. There's no flutter after they let go, just subtle movements caused by the aluminum rods behaving like springs. Why don't we see stars in the moon photos? Critics often argue that no stars are visible in photos from the moon's surface, implying the scenes were staged on Earth. The truth? The moon landing took place during lunar daytime, under bright sunlight. The astronauts wore white, reflective spacesuits, and the lunar surface itself is quite reflective. The camera exposure settings were adjusted to capture the well-lit foreground, not the faint light from distant stars. What about the strange shadows in the photos? Conspiracy theorists point to inconsistent shadow angles, suggesting that multiple light sources, like a movie set, were used. The truth? While the sun was the main source of light, the moon's surface also reflected light, acting like a giant reflector. This reflected light created soft shadows in different directions, depending on the landscape and camera angle. It's a known optical effect, not proof of studio lighting. Who took the photo of Neil Armstrong if he was the first man on the moon? Some claim the iconic photo of Armstrong stepping onto the moon couldn't have been taken unless someone was already there with a camera. The truth? NASA had installed a camera on the Lunar Module's exterior, specifically to film the moment Armstrong exited. Additionally, Armstrong and Aldrin both had chest-mounted cameras controlled from their suits. In Aldrin's photo, you can see Armstrong's reflection, and the mounted camera, not one held in hand. If the moon landing were truly faked, the Soviet Union, America's biggest rival during the Cold War, would have been the first to expose it. Instead, the Soviets acknowledged the mission. In the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, published between 1970 to 1979, the Apollo 11 landing was listed as a confirmed, factual event. Soviet articles even referred to it as the third great milestone of the space age. 1957, Sputnik's launch. 1961, Yuri Gagarin spaceflight. 1969, Apollo 11's moon landing. If the USSR, with all its surveillance and space technology, accepted it, that alone says a lot. Most conspiracy theories thrive due to distrust, lack of scientific literacy, or a desire for alternate narratives. In fact, NASA has released thousands of photos, hours of video, telemetry data, engineering logs, and personal testimonies from astronauts and engineers, all verifying the authenticity of the mission. Even independent researchers and space agencies around the world, including Europe's ESA, have tracked remnants of the Apollo missions on the moon using laser reflectors that were left behind. These reflectors are still functional today, and scientists regularly bounce lasers off them to measure the exact distance between Earth and the moon. The Apollo 11 mission wasn't just about reaching the moon, it transformed technology here on Earth. To make the mission possible, NASA placed massive orders for integrated circuits, pushing companies like IBM to invest in microchip production. As a result, the price of chips dropped by over 90%, directly accelerating the computer revolution. This mission proved that humans could rely on machines, and trust computers with their lives. But despite its success, Apollo 17 in 1972 was the last time a human walked on the moon. Why? The missions were extremely expensive, over $24 billion back then, more than $100 billion today. Public interest faded, and funds were cut. NASA's ambitious plans for Apollo 20 and beyond were cancelled. Now, 50 years later, the moon is back in focus. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the moon, but this time, to stay. By 2025 to 2026, Artemis plans to land the first woman and the first person of color on the lunar surface. These missions will pave the way for permanent lunar bases and future journeys to Mars. The Apollo 11 mission was not just a victory in the space race. It was a milestone for all humanity, made possible by 400,000 engineers, scientists, and dreamers. What seemed impossible in 1961 became reality by 1969. We came in peace for all mankind. The moon landing was never just about planting a flag. It was about proving that when humanity dares to dream big, we make history.